Okay, good evening everyone, and it's already a Gittin Daf Shabbos, another Gittin Daf Shabbos. As we have some wonderful people here in the shul joining us with a presidential visit from Baruch Gold, and Barish Gesserman, who stepped up to the plate and sponsoring Shalosh Shudas. And Reb Kramer and Reb Jackman Reb Kramer is not here. Reb Moshe Jackman, Reb Goldstein, Rigdalia Engel, and here we have Irving Fishbaum, Aaron Swade, Marshall Castle, Saba, Baruchi, and Dr. Guy, Harrison Kletzel, Dr. Block, Yisrael Fisher, Nachman Chapler, Michal, there he is. There's Reb Kramer, Mel Zachter, Ruven Pollack, Moshe Lehman, Yitzhi Muller, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, and Abe Arbach. You should get on the phone, Yeshua Shmuel, and tell your father, I don't think there's a mishmash here tonight. We could use him here. We are holding in this, what a job these Gemaras have been to navigate. We are holding at the top of Mem Daled Amud Aleph, at the two dots, 2 lines from the top, learning with the tefillah that children that are waiting to get into the yeshivas, they shouldn't be waiting anymore. They should have already locked in and getting their school supplies. But those children that are not yet in the yeshiva should get there quickly and easily with pleasantness and the emis and no heartache for the parents. We'll learn for Avigdor Aryeh ben Rivka, should have a refuah shalema b'sech shachar Yisrael. Tan Rabbanan, Gavai b'chayvai. If, let's say, Marshall owes Ike, the guy, money, and Ike forcibly takes Marshall's slave away from him. So Marshall didn't give it. Ike took it. Remember we said Sikrikin are dangerous fellows who could threaten the life of a Jew. So Marshall will quickly say, take whatever you want and leave me alone. So in both these cases, it's not that Marshall wanted to free his slave and exempt him from mitzvahs. He didn't have a choice. So lo yatsa l'cheirus, says the Gemara. So then the slave, that we don't penalize Marshall. It's a rare time where it's not his fault, right? So the Gemara says, but if it's in a case of a collection of debt, we don't penalize. If, let's say, the palace seizes Marshall's crops, if it's to pay up a debt that Marshall owns to the crown, then if, let's say, they took 100 bushels from Marshall, which rids him of his debt, chayiv la'aser. From elsewhere, he has to give 10 bushels to Meiser. Imban Pyrus, but if the crown takes it with an unfair tax, it's not Marshall. Marshall didn't get any benefit from it. So then, Potter, he's exempt from La'aser. But we see if the crown takes it for a debt, even though it forces it from him, Marshall has to pay Meiser. So the Gemara says, well, of course, that's different. Marshall pays Meiser because his debt is now taken care of, so he benefited from the crops. So Shani Hossam, the Kamishtashala, he benefited. His debt is removed, and since his debt was removed with 100 bushels, so he has to give Meiser from that. He benefited. He had the debt removed. Tajma, the Amarav, HaMeicher Avdoi Lefarhang Oived Kechaven. That's a very interesting word, farhang. It sounds a little bit like Marshall, right? So here, what happened is is that somebody was blackmailing Marshall, right, for protection money. He said otherwise his car shop is going to have some unnecessary accidents, right? The glass windows will all of a sudden evaporate, right? So Marshall has those big picture windows in his shop, right? They're all of a sudden going to look cracked. So he sells his Eved to pay protection money. Yotza l'cheiris, but why? Why should the Eved go free? Marshall didn't have a choice. He was being blackmailed. So we just said if they seize it forcibly for a chayiv, then it's not Marshall's fault. If Sikri can come, these murderous bandits, and he gives it to them, it's not his fault. He doesn't want to. Marshall has a funny thing. He doesn't want to lose his life, right? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. So the Gemara says this is talking about a special case where Marshall could have given the blackmailer one of the cars in the back of the shop. He didn't have to give him the slave. And since he chose to give him the slave, we penalize him. Marshall's always talking about all the different convertibles that he has. Could have given him one of the convertibles. Instead, he gave him the slave and vacated him from doing mitzvahs. You should see how shocked Baruch Gold is that you would do such a thing. He wasn't here the whole week. If he would have got used to the things that you were doing, this is petty cash compared to the other things you were up to.
I wasn't there the whole week.
Yeah. Huh? Oh, right. He remembers that you were a no-show. You're right. We just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Sorry, Marshall.
And Baruch loves you. Now, there's always one in the crowd. So the Gemara says, "Hasam havalei lefayis." He should have given them something else, and not the slave v'loy payis. Gufa. The Gemara rehashes this. Amarav, as we welcome in Abe Arbach and Shelley Zeitlin, who's joining us here. Michal says the Gemara, Gufa Amarav Amaycher Avdoi Lefarhang Ovid Kechavim. If he sells his slave to a blackmailer, Yotza l'cheiris, the slave goes free because he's exempting him from mitzvahs. But asks the Gemara, "My havalei l'mavid." So the Gemara says, "Havalei l'fayis." He should have given him something else, v'loi payis, and he didn't give him something else, thereby making this Eved is not going to be able to do the mitzvahs because the blackmailer is going to make him work on Shabbos, etc. So the Eved goes free.
Hello.
Yes.
This is the end of this little topic, right?
No. Which little topic? About a blackmailer?
Yeah. I'll tell you what bothers me. When the Gemara says gufa, usually it elaborates on...
No. The Gufa is just telling us another person who explains what the Farhang is talking about.
This looks exactly like the Gemara.
I know, but the Gufa is on the memra of the Rav. The Havalei Lefayis is an explanation of Rav.
We had that before.
So this was also said in a different base of Medrash. And the halacha is Loizaz Mekayimai. The Rav's statement doesn't have the explanation of my Havalei Lamed. Rav just said that he's Yotzel Chayos.
Okay, I mean, it looks like the Gemara is asking the same thing that it asked before. And
Again.
The same thing that it answered before.
And a Chanami. But it's done in two different base Medrashes, so it's taught in two times. But it's the the rehashing is the din of Rav. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now here, again, remember that Marshall sometimes, when he's short of Romanian frankfurters, because it has to be Romanian frankfurters, right? So sometimes he's hard up for cash, so he looks around to scrounge up some money for cash. So what he does is he sells Tony for just 30 days. Now, after 30 days, he's taking him back. He's leasing him. Is that enough to cause Tony to go free because he shouldn't have freed him for mitzvahs for 30 days? What if he only leased him for 30 days? So Tajma, as we welcome in Mo Kushner joining us, and Mo Kushner has been, let's ask him, Mo, are you out?
How is this not a rental?
It is.
Yeah, thank you for asking, Rabbi. I'm out.
Wow, that's good. We're very happy for you, Mo. Mo was in rehabilitation. For how long were you in rehabilitation?
I was in a rehabilitation now at my daughter's house, recuperating, hoping to go back to Florida.
We're absolutely happy that you're out of rehabilitation. You should be able to go home and for Arichus Yomim with Gesund. And we have Philippe here sporting a white bowler hat.
Actually, it's a pale shade of pink.
Oh, okay.
See this nice feather I put in it.
Okay, it's sporting a pink fedora.
Thank you.
With a feather. It looks very becoming on you.
Oh, Philippe, I never knew.
Yeah.
It takes a hard man to pull off a woman's hat. That's all I can say.
Now. So, Tajma. The Amarav Hamaycher Avdei Lefarhang Oivei Kechavim. If you give it to a blackmailer, Yotzel Chavis. Now, the Gemara thought that meant that he gave it to the blackmailer only for a short period of time. The blackmailer said, pay protection, so he gave it to him maybe for 30 days. Says Gemara, no, Hassam, the blackmail was a lot more expensive. Hassam Befarhang Oivei Kechavim Eina Chazeres. That's talking about where he took it permanently. So now the Gemara declares, what if Marshall looks for all different ways to scrounge up money. So Machrei Chutz Mimalach Daimau. He sells the slave, but he only sells him for breeding purposes. Ike, who buys the slave, is only interested to give the slave to women to breed his own slaves, but he's not going to work him. So he's not going to work him on Shabbos, and he's not going to give him chazer. Chutz min ha-mitzvahs ma'u. He says he could keep all the mitzvahs. Chutz min Shabbos v'Yom Tov ma'u. What if he says that he doesn't have to work on Shabbos and Yom Tov? What about the ger toishiv if he sells him to a resident alien? A resident alien is a guy that keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Now, when he keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, he's still going to give the guy chazer. And he's still going to work him on Shabbos. The Yisrael Mumar Ma, what if he sells him to a renegade Jew who's not going to have him keep the mitzvahs? L'kusi Ma, what if he sells him to a kusi who's not careful with many of the mitzvahs in the Torah? So the Gemara says, one thing we could know for sure. If he sells them to a resident alien, he goes free. Because the resident alien only keeps the 7 mitzvahs b'nai noach. He's not going to allow him to keep Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shait miyachada, ger toishiv, if he sells them to a resident alien, it's like selling him to a guy and he goes free. Kusi v'Yisrael Mumar, if he sells them to a Kusi and Yisrael Mumar, now he sells them to a renegade Jew, the renegade Jew is also not going to allow, but it's not a guy. The Kusi is not a guy. Some say it's like selling him to a guy and he goes free. Yisrael, it's like selling him to Yisrael, he doesn't go free. Now, boy, me name Rabami. Boy, I tell you, there's so much information on these dafim. Really, it's.
Rabbi, can I ask a question or hold to the end?
Okay, you have a minute.
Okay, we keep saying that we're selling to a blackmailer and the slave goes free. How the blackmailer's going to accept this? That he's getting?
No, it means. First of all, we have him. We tell him he has to try to redeem him and set him free. And secondly, if he runs away, he goes free. He doesn't go back to the original master.
The blackmailer.
If he runs away from the blackmailer, he doesn't have to go back to the original master that sold him.
Ah. Okay.
By me name Ramami. Eved shehipel atzmai legaisis. Here you have an Eved. He was desperate to get out of servitude. So he cast himself to a band of thugs. Ve'ein rabba yochel lo yitziyai loy bedinei Yisrael v'loy bedinei Oived Kacham. And the master can't get him away from the thugs, neither with a Bezdin, because Bezdin has no kayach to deal with the thugs, nor can the authorities get him out of there. Mao sheyital es damav. If the thugs offer to pay from him, can he take the money? He's not getting him back anyway. In other words, he tries, it's not his fault. The Eved threw himself into the band of thugs, and he can't retrieve him. He can't retrieve him with a Jewish court, can't retrieve him with a Goyish court. But they say, look, we want the slave, but we're ready to reimburse you something. Can he take money? Or do we say can't take money because now the slave is going to be patum in the mitzvahs, he's taking money for an aveira. Amalei Rabbi Yomi Rabbi Zayka, so Rabbi Yomi told Rabbi Zrika, poik ayin b'mechiltech. Go look into your Tanoic teachings, into the Brises. So Nofek Dok ve'eshkach, he went out, he studied, and he found the following source. The Tanya, the din is you're not allowed to sell a house in Eretz Yisrael to a guy because you're not supposed to take Jewish property and give it to a guy. You're not supposed to be mafkia the property of Eretz Yisrael to goyim. So if you sell your house to a guy in Eretz Yisrael, we penalize that you can't benefit from the money. Dama v'asura. But let's say Marshall has a house in Eretz Yisrael. Easy come, easy goes. He has a house in Eretz Yisrael, and a guy forcibly takes it from him. And neither in the Jewish court nor in the Goyish court can Marshall retrieve it. But the guy is willing to, he's not giving it back, but he's willing to compensate Marshall for it. Mutter lital esdamav. Marshall could take the money because he didn't sell it. He didn't have a choice. He was coerced. The case of Amala ber Shalem, and he could go to the Goyish court, although we frown at going to the Goyish court. That's a very big sin. To take a case to a Goyish court, it's saying that you trust the Goyish court better than the Jewish Bezdin. That's considered a severe chilul Hashem. So, but in this case, since he has no choice, he could register the sale in a Goyish court, because if he doesn't register in the Goyish court, he won't have any record of the sale. Says the Gemara Vidilma, or perhaps it's no raya from a house to a slave. Because we could say, well, we're not geyser that he might come to sell his house, because people don't sell the house, they need where to live. Vidilma, how do you bias? The Kevin bias, since it's a person has to have a house. It's not normal they should sell a house. I mean, we're not talking about real rich people who have more than one house. Aval avda, but a servant, the sagale beloy avda, he could do without an eved, if we allow him to take money in this case where it was coerced, he might come to sell Asilas Munay. Or maybe we don't make such a difference. Shalach lu Rav Ami. So Rav Ami sent the categorical psak. Mini, for me, Ami Bar Nasan, Torah, is the following instruction. Mini, Ami Bar Nasan, Torah Yoitzel L'Kol Yisrael. The following teaching goes out to all of Yisrael. Evet shehipal atzmai legaisis, a Evet that threw himself upon bandits. Ve'ein rabba yochel loitzia loy bedina Yisrael v'loy bedina Evet kechav. And Marshall cannot extricate the Evet neither through a Jewish court nor through the Goyish authorities. And the bandits, the thugs, are offering to reimburse him for the Evet. Mutter lital as damav, he could take the money. And he could go to the Goyish courts in order that they should register the transaction. Because if not, then later on they'll claim it never happened. It's protection for himself. Now, remember what Yisrael Fisher asked. This business that he goes free, what does that mean? So I told him that the owner that sold him has to redeem him. He has to buy him back and then free him. So Amr Yeshua and Levi, says, if Marshall sells his evet to a guy, thereby being mafkia him for mitzvahs, Marshall, you have to take responsibility. You know? We penalize him ad meya bedama. He has to pay up to 100 times his value to get him back. By the way, we see what mitzvahs are worth. You take this Evet Kanani, and you're causing him not to be able to keep a Shabbos, he has to spend 100 times his value. He'd have to sell his car shop, and he'd have to shovel enough snow covering the entire Midwest, right? Up to 100 times his value. You should see Reb Goldstein finds it very amusing. Dafka or ilav dafka? Does it really mean 100 times his value? His value is $10,000. 100 times 10,000 is $1 million?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of money, Marshall. $1 million.
A lot of shoveling too. I'm glad it's only snow.
Right. Well, you could shovel other things.
That's what I was afraid you were going to say.
Right. It's your million, not mine. So Tajma, Damarei Shlakish, this is another halacha. If you remember, we learned this in the Mishnah Yomis, we learned it in the Chak, we learned it in the Mishnah Yomis. You're not supposed to sell large livestock to a guy. The reason why Barak can't sell his cow to a guy, really he should be able to sell a cow to a guy. But we're afraid that if we allow him to sell the cow to a guy, he'll rent it to the guy. And then if he rents it to the guy, he really still owns it. And then when the cow works on Shabbos, he's over the issur of not having his cow rest on Shabbos. So we don't allow him to sell it to a guy. Also, we're afraid that he might sell it right before Shabbos. And the guy will ask for a demonstration to see how it works. And when Shabbos sets in, Baruch will say, run, mush, and cause it to move on Shabbos, which is an Issa Deraisa, of Shvisas Be'emtai. What happens if Baruch does sell? He's hanging around Marshall too much, and he does sell his large livestock to a guy. We penalize him up to 10 times its value. So we see that 100 times was not dafka, because here we say 10 times. Says, well, do mashani Eved. An Eved, it has to be 100 times, because the Eved is not going to wear tefillin. Excuse me, an Eved doesn't wear tefillin. But an Eved is not going to eat kosher, and they're going to make him wear shatnez, Right? Vidilma shani eved to kol yuma mifkalei mitzvahs. That's why it has to be 100 times. Maybe an animal that doesn't have mitzvahs, there it's only 10 times. The Iked Amrei, there's another version. Amrei B'Shuban Levi. HaMoicher Avdoi Lo Evid Kechavim. If Baruch sells his eved to a guy, Kainsin I say ad asara b'dama. 10 times its value. Dafka or lav dafka? Is it only 10 times? Or maybe more? Maybe he has to pay more. Tajma, the Amrei Shlakish HaMoicher Bei Megas Lo Evid Kechavim. Kainsin I say ad mea b'damea. He sells a large animal to a guy 100 times. So you see, when we said 10 times earlier by the Eved, it's lav dafka, because you see, by an animal you have to pay even 100 times. Says no, shani Eved deloy hadar. By the Eved, when he buys it back, it goes free. So that's why it's only 10 times. But by the animal, when he buys him back, he gets to keep the animal. So there we say 100 times. So the Gemara says, well, if the difference is the animal, so instead of 10, it should be 11, not 100. He gets the animal back, so instead of 10, say 11, but not 100. And the reason why we're only kindness 10 times by an Eved is because it's rare for a person to sell his Eved. It's not, we all know that the Eved is eating kosher, he's keeping Shabbat. It's rare, so they didn't make such a big decree. By the way, this is a very unusual usage of milsa d'lei shchicha lo gazber rabbanan. Usually milsa d'lei shchicha lo gazber rabbanan means no gzeira at all. Here there is a gzeira, but not as much. Very, very rare usage. I don't know how many times you have such a usage. Maybe never. Now, 3 lines from the bottom of Mem Daled Amud Aleph, and again, as I addressed the 23 Zoomers and Abba Steinhauser and Sandy Grunfeld, this is a job, Rabbi say. These dafin are an avoda, and we thank you very, 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 very much for joining us. Boy minei Rabbi Yomi and Rabbi Asi. And keep out on the lookout, Rabbi say. Sometime tonight, I am very tired, but sometime tonight, I plan to also record for the Shabbos table. The Chumash here this week was only on Chukas. I didn't get to Balak, so for the Shabbos table, we'll be on Parshas Balak. Also, if you didn't catch it, I have on Torah anytime on Kol HaLashon on YouTube, a very delicious share that I gave to the boys of Yeshiva's Gain Yisrael on how to have success and geschmack from our learning. That's a very, very nice 40-minute share that's available. Says the Gemara, Tajma, Boi Minei, Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Asi. Rabbi Yirmiyah inquired of Rabbi Asi, Mocher Avdoi Umeis. If, let's say, Chatzkel sold his Eved and died, so Mao sheyiknesu es b'nai acharav. Do we penalize his son, that his son has to spend money to get Chatzkel, the Eved back? Im timtze loymar tsarim oizen b'char. The din is that if you're matal mum in a b'char, a kohen has to take a firstborn animal and offer it on the mizbeach. If it has a mum, then he could make a barbecue. If he deliberately makes the mum, then the b'char is forbidden. Now let's say the Chatzkel does the dastardly act of making a mum deliberately on the b'char, and then he dies. Can the son use the b'char? So imtim tzalay mitzarin oizim b'char, if he nicks the ear of the b'char, making a blemish, umeis, kansu b'nai acharav, we penalize the son, That's mishum di isur d'oraisi. To make a mum in a bechor is an isur d'oraisa. Aval hacha over here, to sell the slave is only an isur d'rabanan. It's only an isur d'rabanan. Maybe we don't penalize the son afterwards. The imtim tzalaima, you're not allowed to plan to do work on Chalamoid. In other words, you push off something until Chalamoid. Now, if you don't do it on Chalamoid, it's going to be a davar ovid. You didn't water your lawn for 3 weeks. If you don't do it on Chalamoid, it's going to be a davar ovid. The din is that if you scheduled it deliberately on Chalamoid, you're not allowed to do it. So let's say our dastardly fellow, Chatzkel, v'imtim tzaloi mekiven malachtoi b'moed. He scheduled to do it on Chalamoid, umeis, like konsum b'nai acharav. We don't penalize the son. You know why we don't penalize the son? Because the father never did an avera. He scheduled it, but at the end he died before he did anything. Mishum d'lo aver isura. But hachamai, here the father did sell the slave to a guy. Do we say l'didei kansu rabbanan, that the rabbanan only cancel the sinner? Well, they say the father is not alive anymore. Chatzkel is not alive anymore. Oy dilma l'memone kansu rabbanan. The knas was leveled on the slave, and the slave has to be redeemed. Well, you say the slave is here, and maybe the children also have to redeem him. Amalei Tanitua, there's different levels of things that you're not supposed to do during Shemitah. You're not supposed to clear your field of thorns during Shemitah. Yet, Soda Shiniskatzva Kafza B'Shvias, a field that was cleared of thorns during Shemitah, Tizara l'matzei shvius. You could plant it right afterwards. And we don't say that you can't plant it because you cleared it of its thorns during Shemitah. Nitaiva, but if you fertilized it on Shemitah, or nedaira, or you penned your animals in different parts of the land so that they relieve themselves and have manure all over the field, which is a type of fertilizing, then loy tizara l'matzei shvius. Now, let's say the father fertilized it and then died. If he fertilized the field and then he dies, the son could use the field right after Shvius. The Rabbanan only counts in the sinner. Here too, if the father sold the slave and he dies, the son is not penalized to free him, because it was only the father who was the malcontent, who was the sinner, that's being penalized. Amar Abaya, Nakatinon, Time Tyroi Shel Chaveira. If, let's say, Chatzkel, boy, we're giving Marshall a very big respite over here.
Thank you. I need it.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. He must have his...
He's working up his appetite for the hot dog.
No, he has a note from his psychologist.
She always writes me notes. That's why I married her.
Now, Amar Abaya, Naktinon Time Tyrus Shel Chaveira. Now, the din is if you're Matame, somebody's Tyrus, and let's say it's Truma, and you're Matame, you make it not usable. The only thing you could do with Truma that's Tame is burn it as fuel. But it's Hezek Shein Nikir. It's damaged, it's not recognizable. So really you're not chayiv, but we can send the person that does it that he should pay. Naktinon timei tyrus shel chaver meis loy konsu rabbanon b'nai achra. The rabbanon don't penalize the child afterwards. My time, or why? Hezek sheni nikir, lo yishmei hezek. Really, there's no, in court, you can't exact payment because there's no discernible damage. Uknosa de rabbanan, and it's only a penalty of the rabbis. L'didei konsu rabbanan, they only penalize the perpetrator. Lebrei, the son, like konsu rabbanan. We have a tradition. Now, the Mishnah says, just the Gemara keeps on going. It's really something. Really, really something. A lot of reward over here for this learning. A lot of reward. Or if Marshall, back to Marshall, or if Marshall sells his slave to Eretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, so the slave goes free because he's not supposed to, in Eretz Yisrael, he's able to do the mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael. So by depriving him of living in Eretz Yisrael, he has to free him. If Marshall sells his slave to the diaspora, he goes free, and the second master who bought him has to give him a writ of emancipation. Sometimes he goes free, sometimes he doesn't. In other words, Marshall can only be held guilty if he sells it to a person who's living in Egypt. But if he sells it to somebody who was living in Eretz Yisrael, and then that guy takes him to Egypt, Marshall can't be held, even if he's Marshall. He can't be held accountable for that. I mean, there's a limit to what we could pin on him. And that's what the Gemara says over here. The Gemara tells us, Reb Shimon Gamliel pa'amim yatsa. Sometimes the slave goes free, or pa'amim lo yatsa. Ketzad. Aimer ploini avdi toni my evid mechartiu leploini antuchi. I'm selling to so and so who is an Egyptian or who is an Antuchian. Lo yatsa, doesn't go free, because all he said is, I'm selling it to the guy who was born in Antuchi, but he's living here now. That's okay. L'antuchi shebantuchia. But if he says, I'm selling it to this Antuchi guy, this Italian who lives in Italy, this Egyptian who lives in Egypt, then yatsa, because he's sending him out of Eretz Yisrael. Vatanya. Now this Vatanya is read b'nichus. No, this Vatanya is a kasha. Excuse me. This Vatanya is a question. Vatanya Mochartiu lantuchi yata. He says, I'm selling him to an Antuchi, he goes free. Lantuchi ashari belud, to an Antuchi that's living in Eretz Yisrael, in Lud, lo yatsa. So we just said a minute ago that if he just says he's selling it to an Antuchi, he doesn't go free. Here he says, unless he says I'm selling it to an Antuchi that's living in Lud, he does go free. So the Gemara says, like kasha, hodi islay base of Eretz Yisrael. If this guy from Antuchia has a house in Eretz Yisrael, then all he has, if he says I'm selling it to an Antuchi, he doesn't go free because he has a house in Eretz Yisrael. Hodi islay ushpiz of Eretz Yisrael. If, however, he's only staying in the plaza, he's only staying by the windmill, right? He's only staying in the hotel in Mamila. So then, even if he says, I'm selling it to the Antuchi, he goes free, because we assume he's staying in a hotel, he's going back to Antuchia, right? Only if he says, I'm selling it to the Antuchi that has a place in Lud, so then he doesn't go free. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, Ben Bavel Shenasa Isha Be'eretz Yisrael. This is a very interesting shayla. Now, before we learn this Gemara inside, I just want to talk to you a minute about Nichsei Tzayin Barzel. Nichsei Tzayin Barzel is property that when the wife brings in, the husband adds it to the ksuva. Let's say she brings in a property in Borough Park that is selling now for 1.2 million. And if it's Nichsei Tzayin Barzel, iron sheep, then the husband records the amount in the ksuva of 1.2. Then the din is that he is responsible for that 1.2. If it goes up in value, the husband gets the profit. So if, let's say, it goes up to 1.8, then the husband gets the profit. If it goes down to 400,000, the husband takes the loss. That's called Nichsei Tzayin Barzel. So now, with that in mind, let's see the Gemara. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, Ben Bavel Shenasa Isha Be'eretz Yisrael, a Babylonian that married a woman in Eretz Yisrael. V'chnisa loy avodim u'shvachos, and she brought into the marriage male servants, female servants. V'daitoi larzer, and the husband now is planning to go back to Bavel. So now, do those slaves go free? Because the husband is taking them now back to Bavel. So the Gemara says, there's a shaila, if they get divorced, the Nichsei Tzayin Barzel, can the husband keep it and just give her the money? Or does he have to give her the actual asset? He has to give her the actual property in Borough Park, the actual slave, because it's the Shvach Beisavia, it's her ancestral possessions. So the Gemara says, Tibai, we could clear this shaila, Mamandi Amar Hadinima, that the din is with her, that Nichsei Tzayin Barzel, she gets to keep the actual asset. Tibai Lamandi Amar Hadinima, that he gets to keep it. Tibai Lamandi Amar Hadinima, Kavan Hadinima, since she gets to keep the asset, Kedidadamu, it's like hers. And she's not taking it out of Eretz Yisrael, the husband is going back to Bavel. So it doesn't go free. Or since all the time they're married, he gets the usufruct of the use of the Eved, then Kididei Dami. And therefore, since he's taking the Eved out of Eretz Yisrael, he goes free. That he could keep the Eved and just give her the value. Since he could keep it and give her the value, and therefore, since he's taking it back to Bavel, it goes free. He doesn't own the slave; she owns it. It's like it's hers, and therefore, if he takes it to Bavel, it doesn't go free because she didn't decide to go to Bavel; the husband did. Take Tishbi Ataretz Kushas V'Bayis. Amar Rabbi Yavo, Shanali Rabbi Yochanan, Eved Shiyotza Acha Rabbi L'Surya. Now we're going to see that an Eved, if the master wants to leave Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't have to follow. And therefore, if the Eved does follow on his own volition, the master doesn't have to free him because it's the slave's fault. He shouldn't have came. So says the Gemara, Evet shiyatza acha rabbi l'surya umachru sham rabbi, and the master sold him in Syria, yatza l'cheres. So first of all, we learn out from here that annexed property, Syria, the area of Aram Soiva and Aram Naharayim, was annexed by David HaMelech. And we learned, according to this opinion, that kibush yochid lo yishmei kibush. That what was conquered by an individual is not considered Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, if the Eved follows the master to Syria, and over there the master sells him, he goes free. Says, no, I don't understand. But Tani Reb Chia ibur eschusai. If the Eved follows his master willingly, then he loses his right to get freed, because he shouldn't have followed him outside of Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara, Loi Kasha, Kan Shedas Rabbi Elazar. If the master was planning to return, then the fact that the Eved went with him doesn't mean anything, because he was planning to return. Then if he sells him, he goes free. Kan She'ein Daitei Rabbi Elazar, then the Eved shouldn't have followed him. If the Eved follows him, he loses his right. And then if the master sells him, he doesn't go free. Vatanya, here the Vatanya is a proof. Yoitze yo Eved achar Rabbi l'Surya. The Eved goes out after the master to Syria. Yoitze, he goes. Loisagi do loinafik. Doesn't he have a choice not to go? But Tanana, you can't force your slave to go out of Eretz Yisrael. If the Eved decided to follow the master, so imdas Rabbi Lazar, if the master was planning to return to Eretz Yisrael, so then the slave didn't forfeit his rights because he only followed him temporarily, then kaifan I say, we force the master to free him. But if it's the master was not planning to return, so when the Eved left with him, he forfeited his privilege of living in Eretz Yisrael, then ein kaifan I say. This is where we're going to stop.